By 1945, tens of millions of people across the world were dead as a result of World War II. The Allies were hitting back at full force, putting the Axis powers on the run. Both theaters of war were incredibly brutal, but the Japanese were proving to be a hard enemy to beat. Most of the Japanese soldiers refused to be taken prisoner. They chose to fight to the death, or to take the samurai way and end their own life rather than being captured. The Japanese believed that surrender was unthinkable. The men should either die on the battlefield with honor or be victorious and return home heroes. In the European theater, the Allies had liberated most of the countries occupied by the Axis powers, and they entered Germany in March of 1945, with the Red Army already pushing their way towards Berlin. On February 19th, the Battle of Iwo Jima kicked off the invasion of Japan's home islands. The Japanese had 2 functional airfields and 1 unfinished on the island. The Japanese had fortified the island and dug tunnels and bunkers. A force of around 70,000 Americans took part in the assault against an estimated 20,000 Japanese soldiers. It was one of the most brutal battles in World War II. The Japanese fought to the death and refused to surrender. The Americans used flamethrowers in the bunkers and tunnels. The 5-week battle took its toll on both sides. The surviving Japanese hid in tunnels or in caves for weeks after the main battle. The death toll in the main battle was 6,821 Americans killed and 19,217 wounded. Around 18,000 Japanese were killed and 216 were captured. Hardly any surrendered. Most of the captured were either incapable of fighting or were unconscious when they were captured. Thousands were still hiding across the island. The Americans spent months combing the island using flamethrowers and grenades to kill the surviving Japanese. They used their tunnel system to pick off Americans, but in the end, another 1,600 Japanese were killed. Another 15 Americans were killed and 144 were wounded over the following months. The Americans reached Okinawa. The battle lasted from April 1st until June 22nd. It would be the bloodiest battle in the Pacific. In total, Japan had about 130,000 troops. The US had 180,000. 100 to 150,000 civilians were killed in the battle. 12,520 American soldiers died, and there were around 50,000 casualties. About 95,000 Japanese soldiers died, with 110,000 casualties. 7,401 were captured, a much larger percentage than at Iwo Jima. Many civilians and soldiers hid in caves during and after the battle. The civilians were taught to fear Americans. They were told that they would be tortured or worse if the Americans captured them. Some jumped to their deaths off of cliffs or found other ways to end their lives to escape capture. The Americans now knew that the invasion on mainland Japan would result in an even higher number of deaths for American servicemen. An estimated 250,000 to 1 million or more casualties were estimated to take Japan and end the war. The planning of Operation Downfall continued, but America had been working on a secret weapon since 1942 with the Manhattan Project to build an atomic bomb. It was mainly as a race to build the atomic bomb before the Germans could build one. America had received information from scientists that fled Europe that Germany was working on building the atomic bomb, and if that happened, the world would have no chance at stopping them. In 1939, Leo Szilard, with help from physicist Edward Teller and Eugene Wigner, wrote a letter to President Roosevelt detailing the dangers about the German nuclear program. They proposed the United States start their own nuclear program. Albert Einstein, who was a well-known name at the time, signed the letter to give it credence. Roosevelt agreed, and America's nuclear project was underway. In 1942, Robert J. Oppenheimer started work on the Manhattan Project. and in 1943 he was promoted to director at the Los Alamos lab in New Mexico. Oppenheimer had a role in choosing the location. He had stayed there many times as a young boy, plus the location was far enough from the coast and had flat terrain and was isolated. The German physicist Werner Heisenberg was in charge of the Nazi nuclear program, but it received a fraction of the resources that the American program had. The British had the Tubes and Alloys program, their research into the atomic bomb. The UK was actually much further ahead of the US at first, but America passed the UK and Germany rather quickly. The Soviets had their own program, receiving information from spies who infiltrated the Manhattan Project, but it would not become top priority until after the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs over Japan. The US started buying up land in 1942 for what would become Oak Ridge. They were enriching uranium and proving that plutonium could be produced in a uranium reactor. There was a lack of copper during the war, so the Manhattan Project acquired silver from the US Mint. A whole lot of silver. 14,700 tons of silver. They used silvers to substitute copper, silver wire, windings, plates, anything they needed copper for. The main sites for the Manhattan Project were at Hanford, Washington, Los Alamos, New Mexico, and Oak Ridge, Tennessee. But the U.S. built many other sites across America. Most of the workers had no idea what the final product would be. They were told only what they needed to know to do their jobs properly. More than 500,000 people would be employed to work on the Manhattan Project. Military personnel and civilians. There were scientists, construction workers, laborers, engineers, and much, much more. People from all walks of life, different nationalities from different parts of America, all working together for the future of the nation, even if they did not know that their work would be put together to build the world's first atomic bomb. Germany surrendered on May 7, 1945 to the Allies. But Japan was nowhere close to surrendering. The US was working on 2 types of atomic bombs, uranium and plutonium. For the uranium, in simple terms, the scientists used enriched uranium and designed a gun to fire uranium mass down a tube to hit another mass, which caused a chain reaction, nuclear fission, which caused an atomic explosion if done correctly. They needed to combine quickly to produce an explosion. Lieutenant Commander Francis Birch's group worked on Thin Man. This design was abandoned due to problems with aerodynamics in test drops. The bomb would spin and break up on impact. This team would develop Little Boy, a uranium-enriched bomb that held 141 pounds of highly enriched uranium. Little Boy was never tested. The scientists were very confident that the bomb would work. Plus, there would not be enough uranium left to make another bomb if it was tested. Little Boy was 9,700 pounds, 10 foot long, and a diameter of 28 inches. By May 1945, Little Boy was ready, except for the payload. They needed more uranium before it could be completed. Fat Boy was designed at Los Alamos, and plutonium would be used. The plutonium was produced in Hanford, Washington, in B reactor. They turned uranium into plutonium with nuclear fission. But the plutonium was not as pure as it needed to be for the initial gun tube design, like Little Boy. They would need to rethink the design. Fat Man would become an implosion-type atomic bomb. A subcritical sphere of plutonium was placed in the center of a hollow sphere of explosives, pointed towards the plutonium. It had a timer, 15 seconds after being dropped, to start a barometric sensor and radar system to measure the distance from the plane. After 28 seconds, the explosives were fired simultaneously to push in on the plutonium, making it supercritical, causing a fission chain reaction, making an atomic explosion. Fat Man was 10,300 pounds, 128 inches long, and a diameter of 60 inches. It held 14.11 pounds of plutonium. The scientists weren't so sure about Fat Man, so it needed to be tested. A bomb with the same design as Fat Man was built for testing with the nickname Gadget. The test would be called Trinity at the Alamogordo Bombing and Gunnery Range in the Jordana del Muerto Desert in New Mexico. The name would be changed to the White Sands Proving Ground shortly before the test. About 425 people were present for the test. The Army supplied welding goggles to protect their eyes, and they were told to lay on the ground and face away from the blast. Many groups were set up to test radiation at about 10,000 yards from the blast, or about 5.6 miles. The test personnel were 6 miles away behind barricades, and the project's high-ups were 20 miles away. The test was pushed forward to July 16th, since President Truman wanted the test to happen before the Potsdam Conference. The test was supposed to be early in the morning, but rain and thunder delayed the detonation to 5:30 a.m. The bomb was placed on a 100-foot metal tower to simulate it being dropped from an airplane. The countdown began at 5:10 a.m. The bomb exploded at 5:29.21 seconds. The explosion equaled an estimated 25 kilotons of TNT. The sand below the explosion turned into a green glass for 330 yards. A 4.7 foot by 88 yard crater was underneath the explosion. The mushroom cloud made it 7.5 miles high. People witnessed the explosion up to 200 miles away, and radioactive fallout spread across thousands of miles in the first week. Many humans and animals within 150 miles suffered burns and hair loss. Windows shattered up to 120 miles from the blast site, and the bomb was felt even further away. President Truman learned about the successful test while he was in Germany preparing for the Potsdam Conference. Joseph Stalin had agreed to join the war against Japan by August 15th. Truman informed Stalin during the conference that America now had a new weapon of unusual destructive force. Stalin knew about the Manhattan Project, since he had infiltrated spies into the project. Stalin replied that he hoped America put it to good use against the Japanese. Now that we had the atom bomb, Truman wasn't so sure that he needed Stalin's help with Japan. On July 16th, just hours after the success at Trinity, the USS Indianapolis left San Francisco with part of Little Boy. The destination was Tinian Island on July 26, 1945. She then headed to Guam and left Guam on July 28th. On the 30th, the USS Indianapolis was sunk by a Japanese submarine. Since the crew was on a secret mission, the survivors spent days in shark-infested waters until they were miraculously spotted 3.5 days later in open water by a United States pilot. On July 31, 1945, President Truman gave final authorization to use the atomic bomb on Japan. Hiroshima would be the main target for Little Boy. Kokura and Nagasaki would be alternate targets if Hiroshima had bad weather. On August 5, 1945, Colonel Paul Tibbets Jr. assumed command of the B-29 Superfortress bomber and named her Enola Gay after his mother. Little Boy was loaded onto Enola Gay on August 26th, and at 2:45 a.m., she took off from the North Field on Tinian Island, headed for Hiroshima, a 6-hour flight. 2 other B-29s joined her, the Great Artiste with instrumentation, and Necessary Evil with film equipment and scientific observers. The bomb was not armed before the flight took off, just in case the aircraft crashed and the bomb exploded. It would be seriously bad PR. So Captain William Pearson from Project Alberta was a part of the Manhattan Project, joined the flight. He was also commanding the mission. He armed Little Boy, and then his assistant removed the safety 30 minutes before reaching Hiroshima. Visibility and the weather were good for a drop. The airplane straight flush flew over Hiroshima to check cloud cover and radioed to the Enola Gay about an hour before the drop. Japanese radar picked up numerous planes that night and early morning. Air raid sirens and radio alerts were given, even Hiroshima, but the all clear was given. The crew was given goggles to wear, and at 8:09 a.m., flying at 31,000 feet, Tibbets handed over the controls to the bombardier, Thomas Freeby. The OI bridge was the target, near the center of town. At 8:15, the bomb was dropped. It fell for 44.4 seconds before detonating at 1,900 feet above the ground. The bomb drifted right over top of the Shima Surgical Center. The explosion was equal to 15,000 tons of TNT. The Enola Gay fled as fast as they could away and made it 10 miles from the blast. At 11.5 miles, the Enola Gay felt the shockwaves. 80,000 people were killed in the blast, and another 70,000 were injured. People reported seeing a bright flash and a deafening boom. Within a mile radius, everything was destroyed. A firestorm burned the city to the ground over 4 miles away. Within a year, an estimated 140,000 people would be dead from the blast and radiation sickness that followed. Around 92% of Hiroshima was damaged or destroyed. The Enola Gay successfully returned to Tinian at 2:58 p.m. Tibbets was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. Truman made a warning to Japan in a speech.
It is an atomic bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe. The force from which the sun draws his power has been loosed against those who brought war to the Far East. If they do not now accept our terms, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. Behind this air attack will follow sea and land forces in such numbers and power as they have not yet seen, and with the fighting skill of which they are already well aware.
Japan made no signs of surrendering, and Admiral Toyota believed that the U.S. could not have more than 1 or 2 of these bombs, and believed that they should fight on. Japan reached out to the USSR to try and discuss peace talks, but the USSR declared war on Japan instead. Stalin did not want to mess out on conquering more land before Japan surrendered. Stalin invaded Japanese-held Manchuria on August 9th. Also on August 9th, Major Charles Sweeney took off from Tinian, flying the B-29 named Boxcar at 3:47 a.m. Their target was Kokura. 2 planes would fly ahead to check on the weather, and 2 more would fly with Boxcar. 1 as photography and 1 with instrumentation. For the flight, a bad fuel pump was discovered on a reserve fuel tank, but it would take too long to change, so the plan continued without delay. Boxcar received word that Kokura was clear, but after the weather spotter left, clouds poured in, and smoke from a bombing mission on the nearby city Yahata the previous night. Factories were also burning coal to make thick smoke. Once Boxcar arrived over Kokura, they went on a bombing run, but no target could be seen. They went on 2 more bombing runs, but the smoke was far too thick. 50 minutes had been wasted over Kokura, and the Japanese anti-aircraft guns were firing towards the US planes. So Boxcar headed for Nagasaki, the second choice. Nagasaki had air raid sirens going off that morning. At 10:53 a.m., 2 B-29s were spotted, but no warnings were sounded. The Japanese believed that they were just doing recon. At 11:01, Boxcar's bombardier saw a break in the clouds and found a target. Not the target they were looking for, but they could proceed. So Fat Man was dropped. Fat Man fell for 47 seconds before exploding at 11:02 a.m. between the Mitsubishi Steel and Arms Works and the Nagasaki Arsenal. above a tennis court in a valley. This protected a large part of the city, but the bomb was still devastating. Fat Man's explosion was equal to 22,000 tons of TNT, far larger than Little Boy's. An estimated 40,000 people died in the atomic blast. About 80,000 people would be dead in a year due to the explosion and the following radiation sickness. People who were close to the explosion were incinerated, and those who were farther away suffered greatly from burns and then radiation sickness. Everything was destroyed within a mile, and fire spread for 2 miles. 27% of Nagasaki was damaged or destroyed. Boxcar was low on fuel due to the bad fuel pump and had to aim for Okinawa. Sweeney had to make an emergency landing and could not contact the tower. An engine died during the landing from lack of fuel. The plane bounced up and then swerved. Another engine failed before she finally came to a stop. America had dropped 2 atomic bombs over 2 major cities in Japan. The question was, what would Japan do now after over 100,000 people were killed by just 2 bombs and 2 cities were completely destroyed? The Russians were also now a big deal to Japan, who had hoped to make peace through Russia. That hope was now lost after Russia's invasion. More bombs were being readied, and the U.S. had plans in mid-August for more strikes. Japan's cabinet met on the 9th to discuss surrender, but could not agree on anything. Emperor Hirohito made the decision for Japan and announced Japan's surrender on a pre-recorded radio broadcast on August 15th. Since no decision could be made by his cabinet, September 2nd, 1945, the surrender was formally signed. I hope you enjoyed this one, folks. It's a horrible part in our history, extremely brutal. America's government hid the photos of Hiroshima and Nagasaki for years. The devastation that was inflicted on the civilians. It is history, and it needs to be remembered. Again, I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you on the next. Peace.